the title of this presentation is the accidental digital humanities librarian. So what do I mean by that? Like, who's kind of the targeted audience when I say that? And so I'm talking about librarians engaging in digital humanities or data who otherwise are not, digital humanities librarians or data librarians. So I basically kind of want to talk about my process of starting the support for digital humanities and some data analysis. Follow along with my experience to talk about why librarians might need to learn these different methods and skills, highlight different text analysis tools that are a great introduction for students and faculty, explore some ways to introduce all these concepts to those on your campus, and then also just identify limitations that an accidental digital humanity librarian may face. So the first thing, why pick this up? Why talk about this? There's definitely a growing popularity of digital humanities and data work. This allows us to explore previous concepts or previous projects in new ways. And as we feel I've talked about all week, there's ongoing development of these various tools and strategies. And, doing all this helps us develop a flexible skill set to meet these evolving research needs. So like I said, I started kind of getting into this realm in January. So how did I fall into it? What was my background? So I actually was first introduced to some of these concepts in 2019, part of a Digital Humanities Training Institute called HILT. And I took this class called Help, I'm a Humanist, Humanities Programming with Python. So we were learning the Python programming language to start working with some text data from a humanities perspective. And I'll admit, I didn't have any use for that stuff at that point, so I kind of lost some of those skills as time went on. But in my own research with instruction and things like that, I do a lot of research on digital archives, and with that, a lot of stuff about digital humanities and using text as data kept coming up when you're talking about digital sources. So all this stuff was in the back of my mind. And then the final thing that pushed me to delve into this field or this area was there's a faculty member that approached me, and they said who at the library could assist them with a text analysis project, a digital text analysis project. And I asked around, and the answer was nobody. No one was really doing, at my institution, no one was doing text analysis or anything like that through the library. So I kind of then took the initiative and said, well, we should really support this. And so I kind of dove in, not knowing exactly what I would expect. And sure enough, I found that there's just various types of digital humanities projects and data projects, and it can be a little overwhelming. So when I approached this, I was reminded of a quote that maybe we've all heard some point in our lives, and it says, jack of all trades, master of none. However, that's not the full quote. Some of you might know that the full quote is jack of all trades, master of none, though oftentimes better than a master of one. So I keep this quote in my mind when I approach all this stuff, because we've just got tons of different types of these digital humanities projects. And if you're in a role like me, where you're just kind of falling into this, it's tough to know where to start and what to actually do. Because we're in a role where digital humanities is not our sole priority, so we don't necessarily have the resources to be a true jack of all trades. So I my approach was to familiarize yourself with the main ideas and tools for multiple methods, then prioritize your own skill development based on campus need. So in my experience, I have a short list of examples of digital humanities projects Of course, it's not all encompassing, but it's through looking at various projects and software and what other people have been doing. I kind of had a working knowledge of things like text encoding, data visualization, spatial analysis. Of course, with my archival experience, I knew kind of that digital collections work. And then because the faculty were reaching out to me about text analysis, that is what I made my priority. So, I decided to focus on the TDM, text and data mining, and all the different ways we can phrase that. So again, I started this in January 2021. So this is the spring 2021 semester. So it's really important to set up some goals. So I realized that I needed to develop the skills needed to support digital humanities work and identify tools that I might be using. Then because there wasn't an established like digital humanities center or like a data center through the library, got to promote digital humanities and text analysis just to make sure that faculty know this is the type of research that you could be doing. And then from there, you want to gauge interest and identify who on campus is actually likely to engage in that type of research. So I jumped right in, and like I said, I decided to prioritize this text analysis, text mining, things like that. And a big thing, as we all know, is data skills are in demand. So whether it's we're doing that or we're working with students that want to learn these skills, it's a really important thing to do, especially through the library. And as I mentioned before, text analysis enabled a lot of new research insights. And that's something that I kind of emphasized as I approach potentially interested faculty. And as I was doing this, of course, some of my previous experience from HILT 2019 came through. But a big important thing when you're in a position like this is to kind of reach out and kind of see what other people are doing and get some ideas from them. So I was actually talking to some researchers at Aarhus University in Denmark, and one of them, his name is Max Olgeborg Peterson. He shared his text mining with R tutorial with me, and then that was using R Studio, and he recommended this like open access book that kind of teaches you how to do that. And of course, in my role, it's a little bit challenging to learn all that coding, and I came across something called Voyant Tools, which is a web-based open source text analysis tool. And the great thing about that was it requires no coding. So I kind of and here's kind of a nice screenshot of one of the outputs it can create. So I decided to kind of use Voyant as this focal point to start supporting all this. So I created a LibGuide for a place for faculty to go and to find information on text analysis. Also organize a workshop through the Faculty Development Center on campus, Introduction to Digital Analysis using Voyant Tools. And again, I was using Voyant to introduce others to text analysis because it didn't require any prior programming knowledge or skills. So it's a very good entry point for people interested in text or data analysis. And I delivered this workshop twice in mid-April and also converted it into a nice like self-paced tutorial that people can do on their own. And so here's kind of an example of what that LibGuide looked like. Again, I have a section for Voyant. I also had a section for something called Constellate, which I'll talk about right now. So after I started doing this, the LibGuide was doing attracted the attention of Ithaka, creators of JSTOR, and they have this tool called Constellate. And we were invited to participate in the beta for that. And basically, it's three things. So one, it's a text analysis tool, but it is also a teaching tool. So it has all these tutorials, and it has some classes built in where it teaches you how to code in Python, geared towards those that don't necessarily have that background, that might come from a humanities or social science background. It also has a data set builder that connects with a lot of different collections. So based on the workshop participants, that I did on campus, I was able to identify additional targets to departments to target with DH support. So obviously some of those humanities disciplines were expected, but I saw a lot of interest from like journalism, health science, business, and that gave me some new ideas in terms of like who to reach out to. So the next step was soliciting interest and building this network. So I identified those relevant departments, sent out an email to faculty. And the point of that was to kind of ask about text analysis experience and see who was interested. And I did get a lot of responses, and I ended up with this group of about 10 faculty that were interested in learning more. And we met at the end of the semester and talked about some potential projects. Naturally, with the summer, there was kind of a lag, but the outcome of this was by this semester, by the fall, I was actually invited to deliver the Voyant tutorial that I had previously done to the doctoral research methods class for the English department, and also the undergraduate research methods class for the history department. And especially with the history class, I worked with that professor, and we're getting feedback from the students about how they can incorporate some text and data analysis in their own projects, especially at the undergraduate or graduate level. So what are the limitations or challenges of being this accidental digital humanities librarian? Of course, limited resources, especially compared to institutions with a dedicated digital humanities hub or like data lab. And because DH is not our primary responsibility, we might not have the time to actually learn all these different skills and tools. And with that, faculty project ideas might be outside of our scope. We also deal with limited visibility on campus because it's not necessarily like in our title. My title is Research and Instruction Librarian. So in terms of like data or digital humanities, it's not intuitive for people to go to me if they've never met me on campus. And then you also have to just deal with the field itself, that a lot of tools are being developed or changed, and it's a lot to keep up with. So what are the key takeaways or tips to conclude everything? Again, it's important to familiarize yourself with what you can, but then prioritize based on what the campus needs and what people are actually doing at your institution. With this in mind, it's really good to keep a list of tools or softwares that you can update when you learn about something new. That way, if someone does ask about something that's outside of your wheelhouse, you still have some things you can suggest to them and get them pointed in the right direction, using our reference skills as librarians. Really important to kind of create that landing page, such as a LibGuide that students and faculty can go to. I mentioned, it's a lot of learning new skills. So, seek out those professional development and workshops. I know myself, I'm signed up for that workshop later today about ArcGIS, because that was another thing kind of related to this data and digital humanities stuff. Also really important to build that network of interested faculty, reach out, identify those departments that would be interested. And then the last thing is be upfront about what you can and cannot support, not just to the faculty or students that you're working with, but also for yourself. Don't forget that work-life balance. But I found that, as this digital humanity accidental DH librarian, when people find out you're doing work kind of related to that, they might come to you with all these different project ideas. And like I said, they might be outside your wheelhouse. If you have any questions about some of these strategies that I've used to kind of set up this DH support as a non-DH or data librarian, feel free to contact me. Happy to exchange ideas and things like that.
Thank you, David. It's so great to see a full culmination of your work. I'm sure we all end up accidentally doing something as librarians. So I don't know, I really enjoyed your talk. And it's a nice reminder of how to sort of manage those things when we find ourselves accidentally doing a thing that maybe we weren't sure we were going to have to do. So I do see some questions in the Q&A. I'm going to open those up. First question is, did you address helping new text mining researchers take text frequencies and distant reading into making analytical conclusions? If so, how?
So with that, the short answer is no, not exactly. So at my institution, there's kind of a weird trend that I noticed that many people were interested in doing text analysis, but didn't know where to get started. So when I did these workshops and talked to these faculty, it was definitely heavily reliant on using that Voyant tool to just explore what they can actually do. And, you know, again, because that was new to them, they may have had other projects that they've were working on. So then we didn't get to, you know, actual tangible projects yet. But again, since this is a new thing, there's some stuff in the pipeline. So, you know, that's something that I might be addressing pretty soon.
One more question. What are faculty most often asking for in terms of help with classroom projects?
So again, text analysis was big, and that might be because that was the thing that I kind of emphasized that I knew about. So, you know, things that can create visualizations were big, because it's kind of a nice output, and that's why I used Voyant, because if anyone has used that or is pulling it up right now, you can see that you kind of just upload a sample text and it gives you all these colorful diagrams and word clouds and charts. And so that was something that I used as a focal point. Something that I have been asked about, but haven't done, is the whole like spatial analysis and things using like ArcGIS, you know, doing some mapping, especially from like one question from our English department on campus when the professors wanted to do a bunch of like historical literature mapping, you know, where things originated, and wanted to do this whole interactive thing. So again, since I was focusing on text analysis, I didn't end up doing stuff with that class because that's outside my wheelhouse, but you know, we directed those faculty to the resources that can get them started, since some other departments on campus were doing things with ArcGIS, so kind of made those connections there.
Great, thank you. I think that's all our questions, which is pretty perfect, because that lets us stay on track. So if you want to stop sharing, and then we'll pop over to our next presenter, who is Melissa Cragen from University of California, San Diego. So coming from the West Coast, infiltrating the Southeast Data Librarian Symposium, we're very happy to have you. Welcome, welcome. And she will be talking about Data Stewardship Competency Centers Implementation Network. So take it away, Melissa.
Thank you very much. So it's good to be here. I know some of you folks. I've met some of you others. And so I'm really happy to be here. I live on the East Coast, so I am based in the region. And so this seemed like a perfect opportunity for me to actually meet some more people who are near to me geographically, and with whom I share, you know, dreams of good data. So, great. So I, as typical for my talks, I have way too much content here. And so I will slide by a couple of these slides fairly quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions. I will say, so I do work at the San Diego Supercomputer Center. I'm in the Research Data Services Division there. I work on a number of projects related to data and data policy and data practice. And one of my roles is working in the US Go Fair office. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. as we get started. So for those of you who may not know about Go Fair, I'm sure all of you now have probably heard about Go Fair, which is an organization that started up to really promote the FAIR principles, particularly related to the efforts coming out of the European Open Science Cloud. But Go Fair International is quite global in reach, and a grassroots organization really to help foster the coherent development of FAIR data and services. So I won't spend much time on this. Again, I'm happy to answer questions. Go Fair International has reduced its footprint. It's quite small now, but they've built out a whole range of networks, implementation networks, both for domain sciences to help foster uptake of FAIR principles in the domain sciences, but then also around a number of more soft initiatives related to services, if you will. So let me flip back. There we go. That should work. Okay. So I'm reporting here on a very recent meeting, which was the Competence Centers Implementation Network National Chapters meeting, which just happened last week. And so this implementation network really was developed so that there could be engagement across the states, particularly the EOS states, but now it's much more international and global in reach, and really to help foster better data management and interrelate the FAIR principles into existing research data management issues and implementation mechanisms, and then really to also begin to merge with the open science efforts that are happening both in the EU, but now also globally. There's now a global open science cloud movement being led by CoData and other organizations. Really, the aim has become for the DSCC implementation network really to help drive international convergence around shared best practices, and then really support the development of the data stewardship models that are happening in different kinds of institutions around the globe. So the meeting happened last week. There were about 30 to 40 people each day. The primary aim was we had 8 chapters present. So along with several countries in the EU, also the US and Brazil presented as well. And what we did was we shared some common information around the expectations. So what should be or what is happening at the national level, strengths and weaknesses there, and then challenges as we see them. What we know and what we're learning more together, because we've met now a couple of times, so what we're learning together at the national level around funding, engagement, buy-in and mobilization is that implementation is really happening quite differently. So the ways implementation, or the ways that mobilization and interrelation is happening across institutions is quite different. And that's happening for lots of reasons, in part because of where current initiatives and funding already exist. And in terms of the general challenges, while quite similar, they're also situated in very different socio-technical contexts. And therefore, the choices about uptake and effort are evolving a bit differently as well. So one of the takeaways, though, from this meeting, in addition to the expectations you see on the slide, 2 major ideas were evident: that we have more coordination for collective benefit, so that our national organizations around data stewardship will continue to meet regularly, because we see it's very important for collective benefit, both for how the management or implementation and support services and resources get distributed down through the national level, but that also being able to connect internationally helps us drive policy in some really good ways. And also, though, to help reduce the chance of reinventing the wheel. So we're all sort of working toward that aim. I think even the data librarian chapters across the U.S. are really doing very important and tremendous work to help not only share tools and techniques and things that work, but then to also help us really understand where we might be able to either work together, or share on projects, or begin to adopt things that are working elsewhere. In the next few slides, I'm actually going to talk about a little bit of synthesis across these presentations that were made by these 8 national chapters. Several areas of thematic ideas were quite interesting. And so I took the time to try to bring some of these together. So first, in terms of mobilization, well, it's really clear that data stewardship is an emergent profession. The job titles, of course, are quite different. Just as we saw in the early days of data curation and other kinds of data-related positions across our institutions in the US, the data, it's now the sort of umbrella term, particularly in the EU, but now in other countries as well, is data stewardship. And while we have not necessarily taken that up here quite as quickly in the US, we are seeing emergent job titles that are beginning to look similar to some of the job titles coming up, or at least the roles and responsibilities that are emerging in other countries. And as an example of that, we have new jobs, of course, developing in data engineering, in computing science, where there's liaison work between research computing and the libraries, for example. And these sorts of positions are happening in other countries as well. They just happen to have other titles and are organized under an umbrella mobilizing towards stewardship more broadly. In addition to sort of the European Open Science Cloud as an active driver, there are now in a couple of countries open science competence centers. There are data or digital stewardship competence centers that are actually active on different institutional campuses. And in a couple of the countries, the activities are really organized and driven out through the national research infrastructure entities. At least 2 countries have mobilized in this way, where a lot of the effort toward uptake of FAIR and implementation of FAIR activities is happening through these entities. In the US, we don't actually have, at least I wouldn't characterize any organization as being a national research infrastructure entity that is sort of doing that coordination effort writ large. There are certainly organizations doing components of that, which won't surprise any of you. So Exceed certainly is doing some of that, but they're not touching on FAIR for sure. They are, fairly focused on the uptake of high performance computing and supporting that. But I think we're going to start to see in the US where both open science culture and the FAIR principles are going to start to be driven through some of these organizations in the US as well.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So models are emerging across different countries, very different models. What I'm going to highlight here are just a couple of things. In the Netherlands, there are very different models that are happening, but they are working on developing collaborations between what they're terming local digital competency centers and thematic digital competency centers, where the generic services at the more local level are focused on the findability and accessibility, whereas the domain services are specifically more oriented toward interoperability and reuse. So I think we'll see a lot more of that. Of course, in the US, we're seeing that in terms of conversations happening around more generic repositories, where again, the focus is on the F and the A in FAIR, and in the domain repositories where there's definitely more work happening to connect ontologies and other ways for making data more interoperable at the data set level. Okay, So shared challenges, oh, I didn't move forward. There we go. So shared challenges, really here, I'm going to just highlight two, in addition to just a lot of coordination that we really need to see happen. And this is particularly important in the US as well. And that is for increased collaboration to bring together people working at the governance level of data access and reuse and oversight, and some of the legal aspects around research data sharing. Those are a significant need because particularly in the US, it's driven, of course, by interinstitutional collaboration and team science. It's being driven in other countries for other reasons, in part because in at least some countries, the legal aspects of sharing is quite limited in terms of awareness and in terms of scientists still really pushing that they own their own data. And so, we're moving toward cultural change around open science, but we have very different, particularly when it comes to sharing data across borders, very different understanding of how ownership works and what the legal aspects of different kinds of data mobilization are. So I won't spend any time on this slide. I'm happy to talk about Go Fair US. Some of you are already aware of us, but we are really helping to drive a community of practice around fair implementation. And we have a webinar series we run. I think most importantly, we've started a data stewardship interest group. There's now a listserv that is hosted by, I think it's hosted at Harvard, but that's open for sign up. And I think we'll now start to have potentially quarterly meetings where we can share information happening around technologies around fair implementation and other sorts of efforts, including some of these models for uptake. As I only have a couple of minutes left, I did want to talk about public access some, and I'm sure there are questions about what's happening, particularly at NSF, rolling out PAR 2.0, so the public access repository update and what's happening. So where we're going here and where I think NSF is going is that they have really identified, NSF and the federal agencies, that open science and the fair data principles are now really being acknowledged as a national priority. And so as PAR Public Access Repository 2.0 will be rolled out at the NSF, we anticipate that there will be new, thank you, there will be new requirements around depositing identifiers for data sets into the public access repository, particularly those data sets that are tied to publications resulting from NSF funding. And so it's expected that the PIs will submit their data sets into repositories, that the PIs will then take the persistent identifier that's minted from those repositories, submit that to the public access repository at NSF, and then PAR would retrieve the metadata record based on the persistent identifier. Lots of open questions around repositories and sort of what the preferred repositories will entail, but also what's needed then to make FAIR supporting infrastructures more integrated into the data landscape here in the US. So I know I went through this very quickly. I'll leave the slides here. These are going to be posted in OSF example, as you know, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm going to jump over to the Q&A for you. We do have a question, and that is, in these emerging data stewardship career paths, what do you see as the balance between computer science, data skills, and skills we might associate more with librarianship? In other words, for someone who wants to become a data steward, where are professional development energies best directed?
Yeah, well, that's a terrific question. Thanks. So, yeah, so I'm seeing a couple of trends. One is I do think we will see more, I'm going to use the word convergence, but really there's going to be more development of these positions that are situated amongst and between campus research IT or research computing and the libraries. I think we'll see a lot more of those where there'll be people with technical skills who can help manage things like development of data management plans, where there's particular technologies that need to be implemented across the campus, and making sure that that people have access to the right data engineers or storage architects in the HPC side or the advanced computing side. So I think we'll see a lot more people in those sort of joint roles. But we've got now emerging in the US and globally, there's an international group as well, science software engineers. And what I think, as these engineers who are often embedded in projects continue, as that career path also develops, we'll start to see people who are overlapping with the data expertise. So I think we'll start to see some really interesting new jobs. I think understanding, I think there'll be jobs for people. So certainly metadata jobs for folks who are doing metadata, ontology, standards work. They will be key to making sure that fair technologies, so new open science technologies, are be able to be implemented. We'll need people with those deep skills. We'll need people who can do some coding, but don't necessarily need to be science software engineers. There'll be people doing that. But again, these jobs at the intersections, I think, is where people will really be needed. And I think our field is where those intersection jobs are actually going to come from.